Hello friends, welcome back. Now in the last videos we prepared the data, we loaded the data, we extended the data with a dates table, but we did not cover too much about the additional transformation steps which are available. And here I'd like to give you a little tour about what's actually available for us. Now under home, we already learned that we can import additional data sources like we did for the dates table. Remember that from the last video. If you go to new source here, if you click on it, and I can import additional data sources here and directly then shape it, clean them in the Power Query editor. Beside this, you also can go to recent sources. This is also kind of self-explanatory. If you have recent sources, you can refer to them. You can go to enter data. Enter data would allow us to manually enter data into Power BI. So if you do not want to load data, but manually enter data, so create your own table in Power BI, you can do that by clicking here. So for instance, if I click on enter data here, you see that now I have the option to create a table and I can add additional information here. I can say this will be, let's say, manual table like that. And then I can simply type in something like, for instance, here 1 or 2 and then 3 and then 4. And this will be simply, let's call this numbers here. And then if I go to the new column here, I can add additional information here. So let's say this will be letters. It's just an example, right? So, and then I type in, for instance, B, C, and D. And now I click OK. And what you see is that a new table gets loaded into Power BI. So there it is, this manual table, and now it's also available for us. So this will be just in case if you would like to have an additional table and want to manually enter data, you can do that. For us now, that's not really important. That's why I want to remove it. So right click on it and say I want to delete it. I just wanted to show you that this option exists. So let me delete. And yes, I want to delete it. I want to make sure. So it's also helpful. So you do not simply delete something which you do not want to do it. Because if you delete it, please keep in mind, then it's really gone. So you can't get it back. So that's why be careful if you delete something here, right? So if I delete it now, you see that the table gets deleted and it's not available here anymore. But this would be enter data. The data source settings, for now, this is not that important to us. This is something you can also manage in the option section. But more interesting could be the parameter here. Parameter is allow us to create new parameters as well as manage parameters. So why are these important, relevant for us? Well, these parameters, for instance, appear if you take a look at the query itself. The text query we had here, right? This one for the dates table. This actually referring to parameters, as you can see here. So if you want to create your own M code or query code where you want to give the user of your query the option here to enter something like the start date, the end date, and so on, this is referring to parameters. And this is something you can actually create here yourself. Either manage the ones you currently already have or create on new parameters. Then this would be helpful and relevant for us. Review refresh is simply if you select one of our tables here and you go here and say you want to refresh the preview or refresh all, this simply would refer to the fact that you refresh here the data set, just in case the underlying data set has changed in the meantime, right? So you can then use the refresh option here. Advanced editor, we also covered that. This is helpful if you want to take a look at each DAX, or in this case M code, which is behind each of those tables when you load them. For instance, we have seen this if I go to date here and click on advanced editor. We can see exactly the code which has been applied to the state itself. But remember, if you're missing the M code now, simply go back to the query itself. If you go to the query and then click on Advanced Editor, you see all the code which we have pasted inside, right? So you can do this for all your tables. So also the sales table itself, if you click on this one, which we have created based on these three, remember, if you go to the Advanced Editor here, you see that basically here, let source equals table.combine. And here you can see in this step that basically what happened was that these three tables were combined in order to create the sales table. So this is actually M code. And you can see the M code for each of your tables if you simply go to the advanced editor, right? Or you paste something like we have done here, M code in to create this formula. Besides this, we have the choose columns as well as remove columns. This could be helpful for you because sometimes you have not only, as we have here, a few columns. Maybe you have a data set which has 50 or 100 columns. Then with this choose column option, you have here the option to choose column or go to column. If you click choose column, then you can simply select the specific columns you want to choose if you don't want to have all of them. So for instance, if I untick all of them and I only tick, for instance, those three and I click OK, what you basically see is now you filtered the data. So you remove the other ones. This is what this choose column can do for you. The great thing here is always remember all the transformations you do, they are recorded here in the applied steps. So if you say, I want to actually see my original data back, simply click on the cross symbol here and remove it, and you can see the data, the original data. Okay. So this would be choose columns. Go to column would simply jump to the specific column you choose. So if I say I'd like to go to my order date here, click OK, then you simply go here and you can see now the column is highlighted. So it's an easier way if you have a lot of columns to simply choose a specific column or go to a specific column. You can also select them, like hold your control key, then you can select them individually, or you hold your shift key, then you select all of them in between. It could also be a way to select specific columns. Remove columns is exactly the opposite actually of choose columns. So currently you can see I have the first 3 selected. If I go to remove columns here, I simply remove the first 3 columns because I had selected them. This is why I click on the cross symbol, because I want to keep my original data. I just wanted to show you what's possible here. I would always recommend you to try out the little down arrows which are always available here. Instead of clicking here individually, which simply remove the rows which are selected, click on this one and then you can see additional options, like for instance remove other columns. That would simply mean that I currently have order ID selected. If I click on remove other columns, I would remove everything beside order ID, as you can see here, right? So this would be one way also to remove certain rows in the, certain columns which you do not want in your model. Next we have then reduce the rows. So we can not only reduce the amount of columns we have, we can also reduce the amount of rows we have. So keep columns, for instance, click on it and you can see the options. Keep the top rows, the bottom rows, keep a range of rows, keep duplicates, or keep errors. So let's actually just explore the first one. The other ones you can try to yourself if you want, but keep top rows simply means you click on it and then say I'd like to keep my first 10 rows. Then you click OK, and you see that now we only keep the first 10 rows of our dataset, and all the other ones have been filtered. So manage columns and reduce rows, or reduce rows in this case, simply means that we can shrink the specific table we already have. Let me actually remove this step because I would like to have my complete sales table, of course. Remove columns exactly works the other way around. So can I click on this one, remove top rows, remove bottom rows, alternate rows, duplicates, blank rows, and errors. Also often helpful to remove duplicates, for instance, right? Or you say, well, at the bottom there are the last 10 entries and I want to remove them. Click on this one and say, I'd like to remove the last 100 or so many rows in your dataset. Can be done here. Pretty easy to do, right? And always remember, all you do here on the transformation steps, this is really nice to do it like that, but what happens under the hood is that M code gets generated and this gets applied to your data source. You do not need to know M code. You do not need to know the M language. So programming is not required, but you could do it, because all these steps will be recorded in applied steps and will change then the in this case an advanced editor what you have here, right? So let me change this to show it to you. So if I say remove rows, remove top rows, and then I specify 100 here, and I press OK. It's nice to do it like that. And if you want to see how the M code looks, you can simply click on Advanced Editor here, and then you can see here that removed rows was actually table.skip was the function to apply that, right? So this is something which would be recorded and also can be looked up in the Advanced Editor. So let me actually remove this here one more time. So sorting is simply sorting by a column, right? From A to Z or from Z to A if you want to do that. Split column could be interesting if you have, let's say, let's go to the salespeople here. And our salespeople here have names with a name and a surname. So you could click on this one, and then you can go to split column, and you can see you have various options to split the column. So by delimiter, like for instance in our case a space, or by number of characters, by positions, by lower to uppercase, by digit to non-digit, all these are available. And maybe in the future even more options here. So if I click on by delimiter, then a new window appears, and this allows me now to split the data. Here, split leftmost delimiter, rightmost, each occurrence, and also what kind of delimiter. The default ones, which are already available, or a custom one you can specify. So if I leave it now for the space, in this case, I can simply then click OK. And then you see basically now you have Fred Robertson, Kevin Butler, and so on. So all these names have now been split based on the space. And if you want to rename the new columns, you can either double click on them, like that, or always keep in mind you have the option, or I want to show you, right click on the column, and then there are also various options. And these are actually also the options you find in the ribbon up there. So again, it's kind of redundancy, but you can either find it if you right click on a column, all these options were available in the column, or you go into under home or transform or other kinds of ribbons up there, and you also find these options. Here would be the rename, for instance. You can click on it and you can also rename this table. Let me actually remove it for now. Okay, and also remove split by delimiter. Okay, we got our return back. So the group by simply allows you to group your data. So let's actually take a look maybe at the sales level here, and we can see here we have different kinds of order IDs here, products, locations, and so on, right? So this could be an option. And let's say we want to group by let's say location ID, right? So you can see different kinds of locations here, and of course the location is appearing several times in here. So if you want to group our data based on location, I can select this one here and can say I want to group my data, group by, and then you can specify here the field, basic or advanced. Advanced will simply give you additional grouping options. If I go to basic here, say I'd like to group my data based on location ID, and the new column will be account, and then let's say I'd like to see, I don't know, let's see, I'd like to see the sum of the quantity. So sum of the, let's say there's the quantity here, and you click OK. And what basically happens, you get a transformation here, and now you have a unique list, in this case, of location IDs. And for each location ID, you simply get, in this case, the count here. So in this case, count is the sum of the quantity which has been ordered. It's not the count, it's the sum, because we use the sum as aggregation. So this would allow you to create base aggregation tables. You can group your data, get a unique list, in this case of our location ID, and then we simply aggregate another column. Also be done here in Power BI. Let me actually move this so I get my original table back. Just wanted to show you the example here. The data type itself can be adjusted here as well. Remember, I've already showed you that if you click on the column itself on the data type, you can see that you can adjust the data type here. You get exactly the same result if you go to data type here for the selected column, and you can also change the data type here. The last option is also would be right click here, and there's also a change type option, and also allows you to change the data type, right? So again, I call it redundancy, but I personally like it because sometimes you don't find something immediately, maybe in the ribbon, then you can go to the column, or you don't find it here, then go to the ribbon. So also this, at the end of the day, it depends on what's your preferred way to do it. We also have then the use first row as headers, as well as, remember, always click on the little down arrow to see more options, use headers as first row. So sometimes, let's say your headers are in the first row and you want to promote them. Then you simply would say use first row as headers, and that simply means that the data which you have in the first row become the column headers. The same is true if you have loaded it like that, and you can see that that happens for me now. Let me untick this one more time. If I have, and this one as well, if I have my original data and I would like to have my headers as my first row, so-called demoting the headers, I can also go here and say use headers as first row, the second option. And if I do this and click on it, you'll see that now all my columns have the name column 1, column 2, and so on. And now my headers, my original headers, are in the first row. Also something you can do. Here, the step is demote headers. And by the way, you also see that sometimes, depending on what kind of step you do, Power BI is applying 2 steps when you only click on one thing here. Because what it did here, it demoted the headers, and then it also used this change type option here. So that is why if we want to go back, we have to remove both of them. But this is sometimes really helpful, especially if you have the data maybe starting in the 4th entry or anything like that, and you simply need to promote it as a header. Then this option, as well as the removing rows, could be really helpful in combination. Also interesting is the replace values option. So if I go to my salespeople here, and here I have Fred Robertson, for instance, and other salespeople. Now, the replace values allow us to change values in a specific column. For instance, for the first one, Fred Robertson, if I want to search for, let's say, Robertson, and I call him, in this case, Robert, okay? Just an example. And then if I click OK, you see that now it has changed here. So the whole data where Robertson was has changed to Robert. You see that also for line number 20, Roger Robert, I think this is also changed. So let's actually remove this one more time. And yes, it's the case. So here, this name was also Robertson, and that's why that also changed. And this is an important concept I'd like to point out here. Power BI is different from Excel in a way that you cannot modify only a specific cell. I can't click in here and then double click here and simply change the type or the text inside. That's not possible, because Power BI is working column-wise. That means, and you have seen this, if I apply a step here, for instance, replace values, then this step is applied to the whole column. So, for instance, in our case here, if you only want to rename Fred Robertson and not here Roger Robertson, then what you would have to do is you would have to specify under replace values the complete name, Fred Robertson. Because every time, think about that, each of those steps is always applied to a column, because Power BI is working column-wise. And this is an important concept you need to be aware of, okay? Power BI is not Excel. I'd like to point this out here. Okay, so then we have merge queries and append queries. We already learned about append queries when we created our or combined our sales tables here. Merging queries would simply mean that instead of stacking them, like we done, so 2019 and then below 2020 and 2021, we can also merge them. So merge them would be a kind of joining within two tables. So instead of having two tables separately and they have a common field, we can merge them together and then we have one big table. So this would be a join, which you can do here in merging. And also, if you click on down arrow, you can see you can merge two tables, or you can merge them as new, as we have done with the appending as new, right? And the last one here are AI insights, so text analytics, vision, and Azure Machine Learning. However, for the AI settings, I have to tell you here that these options are paid services for Power BI. So most of them are not available for free. So I'd like to mention that here. So you would have to have some kind of Azure subscription to use those options here. But they are available for you. Under transform, if you go to the next option here, you find that certain options here which you already covered in the home. So for instance, group by here, or split column. If you go to transform, you also find here group by and also find other options here. Like for instance, use first row as headers is there. Split column is here under text columns. So it gives you a little, well, so separation here. Like for instance, this can be applied to any column. This can be applied to a table, this to a text. So this is a little bit helpful. But these are different kinds of things you can apply here. Changing the data type, detecting a data type for a specific column, rename it. So you can see you can rename the column here as well. More interesting could be fill values. So this could be interesting is, let's say you have missing entries here and you want to fill the values down. Let's say you have your country in here and then you have data for the country in here and the next country appears here, for instance. That would mean that all these rows would be empty. And in this case, you could use this fill value because you can simply then select here and say, or the column itself, and then you can click on fill down or fill up. And this would mean you fill or put exactly the same value as above or the value as below, up to the next value when there's text inside. So then this could be helpful. Pivoting and unpivoting the data could also be helpful. I'm showing you an example later on, but this means that simply that we transform what we have in the columns into rows, for instance, and the other way around. Because what Power BI needs and wants are actually tables with less columns and more rows. So unpivoting the data is oftentimes very, very helpful. But we'll see this in a later example. For these options here, split column, we have covered that. The formatting here, normally I don't do it here. We can do this with DAX, so that's actually also not that interesting for us. Also interesting could be this one here. So what you want to apply. If I refer to any kind of numerical field, for instance, if I go to the sales here and select my price or the quantity, doesn't matter, and then there's an option like that, these options here. So for instance, you could say go to standard here, and then you can say add, and if you do that, then a new window appears, and this would mean that I could add a specific number for each entry in this price column. Remember, Power BI works column-wise. That means I can't enter or add the value only to specific entries here. I would add it to each entry, so each cell in this price column. But this could be done here, just in case you say you want to, well, adjust the price for all of them with a certain number. So adding is just an example. There's also multiply, subtract, divide, integer divide, modulo, percentage, and percentage of. Finally, if you have date fields here, then these options could be helpful here. Under date here, you can extract certain fields, like you can extract the year, start of the year, the end of the year, or month, quarter, and so on. So then these options could be helpful. If you have time or columns, then these options could also be helpful for you, like time and duration. And finally, of course, you could also run your scripts. So if you have programming skills in R or in Python, you can also run R and Python code in Power BI. I'll also show this in another course on Udemy, just in case you're interested. And add columns here. This allows us to, well, then add additional columns to our table. So either column from examples could be helpful. Custom column would allow us to create our own function. This would be for a specific column. Invoke custom function. That's also true to invoke here custom functionality which we have. So if you have a created a function in M up front, and then you want to apply this function to each entry in the dataset, then this invoke custom function could be helpful to create a new column, and this column will be calculated based on the function you've created. We'll explore some of those features later on as well. And conditional columns, index columns would simply mean that you add an index. So if you click on this one, you can see that I have an index column here added, simply starting from 0 to the end. Also something you can do if you want to do that. And the other things here also kind of similar to what we've seen before. Here, for instance, standard, the statistics options here. Here we have the date option as well as the time, duration, also these AI insights, which again most of them are paid. I'd like to mention that here as well. And then views, tools, and help. Well, views, in this case, what we have here, which might be interesting to you, is actually those options here. So show white space. If you untick this one, not too much happens, but here the column quantity, this could be helpful because this tells you here what about the data itself, the data set. So if you hover over that, you get additional insights, and you can also see this little green bar here, right? It refers to valid data. So this is an indicator for you, so you know exactly, even if you have a file with, let's say, 1 million rows, this helps you to understand how many data entries are missing here, for instance, or are there any errors from importing the data. You can see this here immediately with the bar itself, as well as here with these options here, if you tick this column quality option. Column distribution, if you take this one here, you get a little distribution about unique values you have in each column. Also could be interesting to you. And the column profile, I also encourage you to try it out. You can see additional things here, which will change depending on what column you select, right? Which you can see then what's happening in here, and a few statistic measures, just in case you're interested into that. Go column, we already covered that. You jump to a specific column, and then advanced editor is simply exactly what we had before. You open this editor here as well. Query dependencies, if you tick this one here, you get an additional view in here, which might change in the future, but you can see simply a relation between your tables currently, which you have in the model. But yeah, that's it actually for a first walkthrough through all the things we have in here. Under tools, there's the diagnostic tools. Just want to mention that here, if you have issues with Power Query, if there are certain things which are slow, then these options could be interesting to you to find out or dive deeper into that. And under help, this simply gives you exactly the same as we have in Power BI desktop window, gives you additional information about the version you're currently using, as well as the blog, the community, and so on. A few links for you. So that's it actually. These are the options you have directly in here in Power Query. So it's pretty powerful. If you have messy data, there are a lot of options to shape your data, to clean your data, transform it, and some of them we have covered, and some of them we will cover later on as well. But here I really wanted to give you a tour through that, and in case you got specific questions, of course, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys.